Yes, I'm going to talk about strategies for thriving with ADHD in the workplace. And surprisingly or unsurprisingly, there are some fairly significant overlaps with the things that we've already heard about from Mila and from Helen. And I'm going to focus on resilience as the cornerstone of how we can better survive and thrive with ADHD in the workplace. So whether we are neurodivergent or neurotypical, resilience is absolutely crucial. And it's important for us to understand what resilience means in the workplace. It's not about being brittle, it's not about being inflexible and gritty. Actually, it's quite often about being quite flexible and being able to move with the flow of work. But I'm really keen that you get some practical tips and strategies from this as well to be able to build your resilience, recognise how resilience and ADHD interplay for you to be able to thrive in the workplace. So who am I? I worked as a service delivery manager in the early stages of my career and worked my way up eventually into a more generic ops rather than an IT specific director role. I spent 25 years across a variety of industries, from IT service management, IT services companies, through end user, and ended up actually in the energy industry. And since 2020, I've been working as a leadership coach and consultant. And through that journey of setting up my own business, I came to my own diagnosis of ADHD at the ripe old age of 48. Smack bang in the middle of Perry as well. So lots of relatable aspects of Helen's story. And now I'm really specialising in supporting leaders in the workplace who are struggling with aspects of their ADHD. What I discovered as I came to my realisation, my diagnosis of my ADHD, was that about 60–70% of my clients either were or suspected that they may have ADHD, though it had happened accidentally or maybe we found each other. And what happened for me and how I reached my diagnosis was left the structure and the constraints, I guess, of the corporate world, having been always in very busy, chaotic, high stress environments, which were brilliant for my ADHD brain. I just never realized it at the time. And then I stepped out to set up my own business, which happened to coincide with COVID, homeschooling a very feisty 6-year-old, and the wheels came off ultimately. Perimenopause, the lack of structure, the lack of constraint. I wanted to do all of the things. I started to do all of the things. I finished none of the things, and found myself in a pretty sticky place in mid-2020, really feeling very lost, very confused by what was going on for me. And through many discussions with GPs, psychologists, psychiatrists, and actually looking at what was going on with my daughter, a very good friend who's an educational psychologist gave me a very strong nudge to look at ADHD. And as I went through my diagnosis journey, it was like a light bulb switched on. And I could see from school, through early career, through mid-career, right up until that point of diagnosis, how ADHD had really impacted me in the workplace, particularly, and in my life. And I'll share a couple of those little anecdotes as we go along. But I'm hoping, whether you are neurodivergent or not, there will be some real benefit from the next 20–25 minutes as well. Whether you're neurodivergent or not, there are some strategies for managing life at work that will be helpful. And there are people who are subclinical, so they're not sufficiently ADHD to have a diagnosis, but they have some ADHD-esque traits which might come into play in the workplace as well. So that will be helpful. A couple of definitions before I start. I'll talk about neurodivergent individuals or neurodiverse groups of people. I'll mention a specific aspect of ADHD or neurodivergent conditions, which is rejection sensitive dysphoria, or RSD. And this is a real deep sense of pain and struggle when there is real or perceived criticism or rejection. And it's one of the biggest things that will play out for people in the workplace if they have, it's often one of the biggest things that impacts people in the workplace if they do have ADHD. In the chat earlier, one of the participants was talking about ADHD, so that's AUDHD, which is the lucky individuals who have both autism spectrum conditions and ADHD. So they have some aspects of ADHD traits and some aspects of autistic traits, which can be especially tricky because sometimes they really fight against each other as well, which can make somebody with ADHD really struggle with some aspects of that.
Sarah, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Okay, you've moved to the second one. I was just checking that the slides were progressing. That's fine.
Yeah.
All good. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about what resilience is, the ADHD lens on that. I'm going to talk particularly about emotional regulation. I mentioned RSD before, and overcoming overwhelm, and then how we can build resilience with some support strategies and additional resources at the end. So what is resilience? It's about your ability to adapt, to cope. As I said, it's about being able to be flexible. I think of resilience as being more bamboo than oak tree. It's that ability to flex and move. And it can be looked at an organisational level, but also at an individual level. And there was a lot of academic research done in the early 2000s about resilience at work. And there was actually a resilience at work scale, or the RAW scale, that was developed from that. And it's used by organisations such as Gallup to do their employee surveys and various other mechanisms. There are 7 aspects of resilience at work. So I'm going to go through them quickly now in the general, and then I'm going to come back to what they look like and mean specifically with an ADHD lens. So the first aspect of resilience at work is being able to be authentic, knowing what your personal values are and being able to do that in the workplace, to be able to bring your whole self to work rather than feeling that you've got to leave yourself at the door and don a corporate persona before you get to your desk. The more authentic you're able to be, the more resilient you are, the better able you are to cope with the trials and tribulations of the workplace. The second is purpose, having a real connection with what you do. And that might be a higher purpose of the business, the organisation that you're working for and what they're trying to do in the world. Or it might be the role that you play within the organisation, knowing that that has purpose, that it aligns with your core values, your beliefs, that you know that you're important in the work that you're doing. That also builds resilience and makes it easier to deal when things are trickier. Having a sense of perspective, being able to stay optimistic, to think about the solution to a problem that presents itself, being able to keep that future focus is also incredibly important when it comes to being resilient at work. And then psychological health, it feels like it goes without saying that it's so important to our resilience that we have good mental health, that we've got routines both in our work and in our home lives that enable us to cope and offload with the daily stresses. And that we're working, I'm not sure I like work-life balance because I'm not sure it's ever a balance, but that we're managing that dance well, and that we're making sure that we've got time to relax and to recover from the stresses of our world. And when it comes to psychological health, I'm always reminded of this quote, which I absolutely love. It's been attributed to many different people, but my understanding is that it's an old Zen adage, which is that you should sit in contemplation or meditation for 30 minutes every day, unless you don't have time, in which case you must sit for an hour. Which obviously, Simone likes that one, which obviously doesn't make sense on the face of it, but actually the more you think about it, the more useful and helpful it is, because in taking time to relax, in taking time to recuperate, you're better able then to be much more effective in the work that you do thereafter. So I thought I'd bring that in for anyone who resonates with that. And then the final three aspects of resilience at work are cooperation. So the ability to cooperate with your colleagues at work, to seek advice, to be able to support and gain support. For that to be a two-way process and to feel that you're not alone in the workplace. And that's certainly one thing that I really struggled with when I set up my business. If any of you are self-employed or working alone, it can be quite a lonely place, and that can impact your resilience. You're finding ways of building that cooperation and connection can be important. Sixth is physiological health, and Helen talked a bit about this, making sure that you've got your sleep patterns in good shape, that your nutrition is good, that you're hydrating. And the last role I was in was very, very high stress. And I used to joke that being hydrated was actually a competitive advantage in the workplace, because everyone else was hungover because it was the only way that they felt they could cope with it. And I coped with it by having at least 2 litres of water a day. So at least I was on track on that basis. And then finally, strong networks. It's incredibly important to have people that you can connect with outside of your existing workplace. Things like the ITSMF forums are fantastic. Finding groups and connections, either that align with your work and or align with your life. So you've got people outside of work to be able to rebalance with, to help put things into perspective, to help bounce ideas off, and to be able to be 100% authentic, which isn't always the case with people in your workplace. So that's a very brief whistle-stop tour to resilience at work. And ultimately, it's a leaky bucket. We put into our bucket, and if things in our life are good, we've got a supportive boss, we've got a great work environment, where on top of our physiological and physical health, that bucket's in good shape. We've only got a few small holes and the depletion is slow. Sometimes it can feel like you've not even got a bottom in the bucket. And that's certainly how I felt in the run-up to a number of burnouts that I've encountered through my career, where literally everything that I was putting in to top me up was gone within moments. And it's only with the gift of hindsight that I can see neurodiversity and perimenopause really playing into those two things. Little giggle from Helen there. And really recognizing the impact that being unaware of a neurodivergent condition can really have in your resilience at work. So let's apply an ADHD lens to this now. Looking at those 7 aspects, authenticity can really be a struggle for everyone who's neurodivergent. Neurotypicals as well can struggle to be truly authentic in the workplace, but particularly if you are neurodivergent, that perceived need to mask, that you can't be fully yourself, that you can't bring your whole self to work, that your quirks, your foibles, your stims are something that wouldn't be appreciated. As somebody with ADHD, I look back into my 20s and I can see the number of times my ADHD personality was squashed because I wasn't aware of it, and that I became less and less of myself as I knocked bits off and became more of a mask, more of the perception of what I thought was needed in the workplace, rather than saying, I have ADHD, therefore I might speak over you from time to time. Please tell me to be quiet and I'll come back to it afterwards. Or allowing me to fidget and doodle, because that meant that I was better able to quieten my brain and be authentic and fully present in the meeting. Helen is currently doing stitch cross or something like that to help quieten the mind while you pay attention. And I remember conversations with managers going, you doodle in meetings, it's really unprofessional, it's rude. It isn't, it's literally how I make sure that my mind is fully focused. So being aware of that authentic self and what you can do to bring a little bit more of that authenticity into the workplace is really key. Purpose is really important for neurodivergent people. There is an aspect of ADHD called situational variability. And it can be incredibly frustrating if you are the manager of someone with ADHD, because they do some stuff really well, really quickly, brilliantly, and other stuff, it's like trying to get blood out of a stone, because the ADHD brain will be really focused on and committed to doing stuff that they find interesting, that they find challenging. If they've got a really big deadline for it, it's 100% focused. The stuff that is much harder, much less interesting. By harder, I mean it's harder to an ADHD brain. The stuff that's boring, the stuff that's run rate, is much harder for an ADHD brain to get onto. So linking your tasks to your purpose can be incredibly helpful, to really link it to, if I get this stuff done, that means that this stuff will happen, which gives that dopamine boost, which means that you're more likely to be able to get on with it and do it. Perspective, having that future focus, that solution focus, can be incredibly difficult for somebody with ADHD who is emotionally dysregulated. So with the ADHD brain, we often can find our emotions take the steering wheel too often. And that plus rejection sensitive dysphoria can really make it very hard in the workplace. There's a perception that there's a project that's excluded you because you're not good at your job, or because you're not liked. And that's the direction that your brain will potentially go. And you might end up in rumination, really upset and worrying about all of these things that are not real. So having that awareness that these things may not be real is very important. And there's a fabulous tool that's used by a lady called Byron Katie. And it sounds like I've got her name back to front. She does have a surname for a first name and a first name for a surname, Byron Katie. And she says that when you're in that space, and again, neurotypical or neurodivergent, ask yourself, is this thing that I'm thinking true? Have I got actual proof that it's true, that I've been excluded on purpose, that I'm not good at this, that whatever it is that your inner critic is telling you? Secondly, is it helpful? Even if I have some sense that this may or may not be true, is it helpful for me to be believing this? The chances are the answer to those two questions are going to be no. The third is, what do I think I'm gaining by believing this? What do I think I'm getting from telling myself this? And a lot of the time, it's that realization that you're trying to keep yourself safe. You're trying to prevent more rejection or more criticism. And actually, again, that might not be genuinely what will happen by believing this thing. And the fourth question is where the magic happens. And that is, what would be a more helpful thing? If my friend was telling me this, what would I be advising them? What would I be saying to them instead? So is it true? Is it helpful? What am I gaining? And what would be more helpful? Can really free us from that emotional dysregulation and allow us to get ourselves back into a more positive perspective. And that's really closely linked then with psychological health. When we're in that rumination, emotional overload, emotional dysregulation, it can be really hard to recognize and find our path back to good psychological health. So finding what works for you. Is it music? Is it a dance? Is it taking time to meditate? Is it having a nap in the middle of the day? What are the things that help you reset and get yourself back into good psychological health? Cooperation, talking with your colleagues, being able to share and be honest in the workplace about your strengths and your challenges and how ADHD can trip you up in the workplace is incredibly important. It will help you find ways to tackle specific challenges. And perhaps you can buddy up with a colleague who's very good at the things that you're not so good at. Maybe you can, and I'll talk about in a little bit more detail slightly later on, use body doubling, where you sit with another person and you get through some tasks that you both need to get through, that you're finding that you're not as motivated to do, or that you're procrastinating on. There's something about sitting with somebody, and even on a Zoom call, to get through that work that makes it easier to commit and overcome the procrastination. Physiological health, Mila touched on it, Helen mentioned it, making sure that you are moving your body, that you are eating really good nutrition, good nutritious meals, high protein, low sugar is incredibly helpful for neurodivergent brains. Thinking about supplements and nootropics, even if you're not on ADHD meds, there are a number of supplements that can be really helpful. NB, I am not a nutritionist. I'm not going to give nutrition advice, but there are fantastic nutritionists out there who are ADHD trained and can talk through which supplements are incredibly helpful with ADHD. And finally, support networks. So finding other neurodiverse groups or support networks for neurodivergent employees. It might be an ESG group within your organisation. It might be that there's a local community that you can join. There are lots of online forums as well that are very helpful. At the end of my presentation, I've referenced a couple of YouTube channels from fairly significant, preeminent psychiatrists in the ADHD space, namely Russell Barkley and Ned Hallowell, who have huge amounts of information. So if you're curious to go and learn more, then I can highly recommend their YouTube channels. So I've talked about some of the challenges, but actually, and I promise you, I will never use the word superpower. I hate it with a fiery passion. If you're struggling with a neurodivergent condition, it never feels like a superpower, but we do have some strengths. I was brilliant in my service delivery roles because I was incredibly creative. I could think out of the box. I was adaptable. I was constantly scanning for potential problems, and I could run 14 different tracks all at the same time. It absolutely spoke to my strengths as an ADHDer. And these are a number of things that have been said about some about my clients and some about famous ADHDers, but out of the box thinkers, great at finding innovative solutions, ability to connect things that appear to be unrelated, really thrive in brainstorming or ideation sessions. People with ADHD tend to be incredibly adaptable. They're quick to pivot. They're much more comfortable with uncertainty than many people are. They can deal with ambiguity, shifting priorities and moving goalposts, bring that excitement that ADHDers can really thrive on. And then there's this thing called hyperfocus, which is a blessing and a curse. We have the ability to really focus in on things that really excite us, that ignite our passion, that we have a sense of urgency about, to the point that we can forget to go to the toilet, eat, drink, pick up the kids from school, remember that dinner needs cooking. I can see lots of nods. So there's a recognition here of that aspect of hyperfocus. And we can go off down rabbit holes, which can be a real positive and a negative. So playing to those strengths is really important, and recognizing that all of the challenges can lead to overwhelm, but we've got these strengths that we can rely on as well. Typically, as an ADHDer, I have tried to fit way too much content in, so I am going to skip over a little bit more. I think I've covered a lot of the challenges that we face with ADHD in the workplace. So I'm going to move on to a few more of the support strategies. So Russell Barkley, who I talked about earlier as one of the leading psychiatrists in the space, talks about ADHD as not being a disorder of knowing what to do, but rather a disorder of doing what you know at the right time and in the right place. So sometimes, you know what to do, but actually physically doing it can be a real challenge. You sat on the sofa knowing that you've got to get 17 things done and not actually being able to make a start. So think about your strength. and think about how those aspects of resilience can fuel you. So goal orientation, thinking about what does this mean, not just for me, but for the team, for the organization, for our customers, to use that as a hook to get back into motion again. What resources can be leveraged? I promise you, a new planner is not going to fix all of your woes, but there are some tools that will really help you as somebody with ADHD. It might be that you struggle with object permanence. And this is where, if you can't see something, it ceases to exist, which happens much more with a neurodivergent brain than it does with a neurotypical brain. So having very visual cues. So I use a to-do list or an organizer app called TickTick. I went for days, weeks without opening the app because I'd forgotten that it was there. So I now have a post-it note on my screen and I move it around because if it's always in the same place, it becomes invisible. And it just says tick, tick. And I say, I'm like, yes, I need to go and open that app. Sounds so simple, but as an ADHD, these are the things that we forget. We literally forget that they exist. I have a messy desk. I can always find what I need. If I tidy it up, no chance. I have an app called YAP, Y-A-P-P, that randomly pings things onto my screen throughout the day. So I've got a number of reminders like check tick tick, check your calendar, check your email, do these things, and they'll randomly pop up at different times of the day. So I say, yes, okay, that's a good reminder. Having those visual cues and resources can be incredibly important. Find your tribe, find the people who get you and can help call you out on this stuff in a really positive way. I talked about body doubling earlier. There's a platform called Flown, Flown, that is literally a body doubling app. You can do a join at any time, or you can join a specific session, and there are lots of other people there trying to get their work done. And it's a brilliant way of getting through those slow, boring administrative tasks that need to get done with a little bit of external impetus. Really thinking about what your strengths are and how you can leverage them is helpful. And don't fall into the trap of thinking, I have ADHD, so I can't. I have ADHD, so this is always going to be difficult for me. Brilliant work by Carol Dweck, where she talks about the growth mindset. So thinking about the things that you get wrong as an opportunity to grow, the more aware you are of how your neurodivergence plays out in the workplace, the better able you will be to overcome that and put tools and resources in place to help. So if not now, certainly in the next, sometime later today, I would love you to take a little bit of time to think about your personal resilience. Whether you have ADHD or another neurodivergent condition, or whether you're neurotypical, still think about that leaky bucket. What is it that depletes you? And what could you do to change it? If you do have a neurodivergent condition, how can you advocate for your needs at work, and what would help you to stay on track and feel less depleted in the workplace? And if you're not sure where your strengths lie in your resilience, I do have if I can work out how to do it, I do have a short quiz online, which I can share in the chat and it will go out in the email afterwards as well. So if anyone would like to, it's about 20-25 questions that will just step you through those 7 aspects of resilience and give you the opportunity to get a little bit of feedback about where your strengths really lie in resilience and where the gaps might be, so you know where you can focus to improve your resilience in the workplace.